Chapter 8 of Tractate Menachos covers some laws of the Todah offering. The first Mishnah says the Todah offering was an animal offering that was brought with a whole bunch of bread loaves, 10 proper loaves and 30 unleavened matzahs. The breads of the Todah offering come from 5 Jerusalem sa'ahs of flour, which is the equivalent of 6 wilderness sa'ahs, which was 2 variants of measurements, which is also the equivalent of 2 ephahs, which is also the equivalent of 20 isarain, 10 of which went to the loaves and 10 of which went to the matzah. So as there were 10 loaves, it would end up being an isarain per loaf, but there were 3 variants of matzahs, so 30, so it was 3 matzahs per isarain of flour. Another method of calculation, the Jerusalem measure of 5 sa'ahs was the equivalent of 30 kav, so 15 for loaves and 15 for matzah. This would mean a kav and a half were used per loaf and a kav for every 2 matzahs. The Gemara brings the verse which shows that the ephah had 3 sa'ah measures, which it sources even further. Related to this, it said that we cannot increase the measure by more than a sixth, and we also cannot increase the weights of coins by more than a sixth, and when selling things you cannot profit more than a sixth. This principle is based on a verse. New Mishnah. By the Todah offering there were the loaves and the 3 types of matzahs. The Kohen would take 10 from each of these 4 types as a teruma tithe from unbroken loaves, which it sources. The owner gets to eat the remainder. The Gemara additionally expounds on the verses for these principles, going through them at length. There are some conflicting sources on the amount of flour used per loaf, which are discussed. It also disputes what type of teruma tithe exactly this is, being taken from the Todah loaves. In fact, it's asked if a non-Kohen impermissibly eats these tithe loaves, as these are compared in scripture to the terumas ma'aser tithes. Do they have the same punishments for eating them, and can their minimums combine? That goes unresolved. Further sources are considered. New Mishnah. The inauguration offering of Aaron also had loaves, and they were brought like the matzah portion of the Todah offering with 3 types. The Nazarite offering has the matzah, but only 2 types, meaning the Nazarite loaves were made out of 10 Jerusalem type kavin of flour, which was 6 2/3 isarin equivalent. The Gemara brings sources, and also for the different types of these matzah offerings. When the Kohen Gadol is anointed, it said he needs 2/10 of an ephah of the last variant of matzah offerings, one for his anointment and one for his initiation. If he had never performed the service as a regular Kohen, he'd actually bring 3 of these. It also brings sources that describe this proper method of the Nazarite offering. New Mishnah. If somebody slaughters a Todah offering while its breads are outside of the temple courtyard, the bread would not be sanctified. If the animal was slaughtered before the bread finished baking in the oven, or even if one of these breads isn't finished, the breads aren't sanctified. The Gemara quotes a debate as to what it means that these loaves are outside of the courtyard. Some say it means that they're all the way outside of Jerusalem, others say it just means that they're outside of the actual temple courtyard, based on if proximity would be sufficient. There's a similar dispute as to how far chametz, leavened bread, needs to be from the slaughtered paschal offering. Both of these had to be mentioned, as chametz itself is prohibited, and by the Todah breads you could consider proximity to be a factor based on a verse, so I needed to bring both of these to show that the opinions maintain themselves by each. It sources the remaining principles. It said that on Passover you could sufficiently eat matzah that was partially baked, or if it was made in a pan. Partially baked matzah is if you can pull the pieces apart without dough stretching between the pieces, and it said that the Todah loaves are permissible if they're in this similar manner. If a Todah was slaughtered for 80 loaves as opposed to the proper 40, there's a debate if 40 of them become consecrated or if none of them become consecrated, if nothing was specified. This is based on if we think that he wants these extra loaves to be a guarantee, or if he actually just wants an overly large offering. If he has specified that 40 should be consecrated, then 40 are consecrated, while if he had specified that only all of them should be consecrated, then none of them are. Others explain this to be differently and say his intent clearly is to bring an overly large offering, and it's just a debate as to whether the service vessels can consecrate things without the owner's intent. Another variation is that it's agreed that service vessels can consecrate items without intent, and the debate is whether the slaughtering knife can consecrate without intent. Alternatively, it's that everybody agrees that the service vessels cannot consecrate items without intent, and the same debate exists by a knife as to whether it's better than these service vessels. New Mishnah. If somebody slaughtered the Todah offering with improper intent of time or location, the bread is still sanctified. If the animal was slaughtered and it was found to have a defect, the bread is not sanctified. If the animal was slaughtered and it was found to have a blemish, there's a debate if the bread is sanctified. If the animal was slaughtered for the sake of a different offering, the bread is not sanctified, and the same applies by Aaron's inauguration offering in the 2 Shavuos Shlomim lambs. The Gemara explained who this is in accordance with based on individually held opinions. The opinion essentially holds that by the Todah offering, if the animal's invalidation existed before the animal was slaughtered, the bread would not be sanctified, and if it was invalidated after the slaughter, then the bread would be sanctified. Others dispute this principle, and it discusses these further. By the animal's blemish, some say this is not a case where the invalidation preceded the slaughter, as it could be a cataract specifically, in accordance with the opinion that an animal with that blemish could be left on the altar. Others disagree and say that while it would be allowed to be left on the altar, it would not be able to sanctify the bread. A related dispute: if a chatas offering was slaughtered with improper intent of time, if it was brought on the altar, it should just be left there. But if it had improper intent of location, there's an argument if that's comparable to improper intent of time, based on whether it could then be left on the altar. It's disputed as to who we hold like. The mission ended by giving the example of Aaron's inaugural offering as opposed to the more common Nazirite offering, as the former was the original, as it was the first type of offering ever brought. New Mishnah, regarding libations that were consecrated in a service vessel and then their offering was found to be invalid, if there is a different offering that needs a libation, they should just shift the libation over to that one instead. If the libation is left overnight, it's invalid. The Gemara says libations are sanctified by the slaughter of the accompanying animal, which it sources. Others disagree and say they're sanctified by being placed in a service vessel. Now, we said libations could be transferred between offerings. This cannot be done with oil for a mincha offering, as that's an essential aspect of the mincha, so it can't be transferred. We don't just deconsecrate the libations, as then people would think that that's permitted to be done by other items in a similar status. This concern doesn't exist by switching the offering of the libation, as people will think that that was its original intended use, as those offerings were slaughtered at the exact same time. This notion that the court can just make sanctity of an offering conditional wouldn't apply by the Talmud offering, as those uniquely can be resolved by being left to graze until they develop a blemish. New Mishnah. Regarding the offspring of a Todah offering or its substitution, or if a Todah was lost, a replacement was then made and the original was found, this additional Todah doesn't require bread to be brought with it, which is based on a verse. The Gemara additionally expounds on this source. Some say these surplus Todah offerings would require bread if they're brought before the owner was atoned. That's disputed. It's also said whenever a case is that a chatas is supposed to be left to die, in a corresponding case with a Todah offering, it doesn't require bread. If the chatas is left to graze, the Todah equivalent would require bread. Others apparently disagree, quoting disagreeing verses. In fact, a case where a chatas being left to graze is even possible would be if somebody designated two chatas offerings as a guarantee. He can be atoned through one of them, and the other one would be left to graze, in accordance with one opinion. However, others disagree with this entire principle, saying that all of these unique chatases are just left to die, meaning that a similar replacement Todah is never offered with bread. This is as he holds that a person cannot be atoned through benefit that accrued to consecrated property, such as the offspring of a Todah and similar. Related, if somebody designated a Todah and its bread, and he loses the bread, he can bring a new bread. But if the Todah is lost, he cannot bring a new Todah. And this is as the bread is supplementary to the Todah, but not vice versa. Another rule: if somebody designated money for a Todah, and he had some extra, he can purchase the breads with that fund. But if he had designated the money for the bread, he cannot use the excess to buy a Todah. And this is as the bread is also referred to as a Todah, but the Todah is not referred to as bread. And if somebody designated a Todah animal, and he lost it, and then he designated a new one, and then he lost that, and then he designated a new one, and then he found the first two, if he receives atonement through the first animal, the second does not need bread, and the third one does. If he atones through the third animal, only the first animal needs bread, and if he's atoned through the second animal, neither of the others require bread. Others disagree, and say that no matter which is used, the others don't need bread, as they're all considered replacements of each other. It discusses another similar case with similar principles and explains why we need both of these. Related, if somebody's Todah offering was mixed with its replacement, and he's not sure which is which, and one of them died, the other cannot have bread offered with it, as we're not sure if it's the correct offering. And this is where he didn't take a vow to bring this Todah, as otherwise he could just designate a new animal as a guarantee for its original. So it's disputed as to what to do in this case. There are a number of options that are suggested and rejected. There are about 8 of these, but all are left inconclusive for various individual reasons. And it said that there's just no method to offer the surviving Todah animal. New Mishnah, if somebody says that it's incumbent upon himself, meaning he's taking a vow to bring a Todah offering, he should bring a Todah and unconsecrated regular bread with it. If somebody said that he's bringing an unconsecrated Todah and bread from Ma'aser Sheni tithes, both the Todah and the bread should be unconsecrated. If he said he's bringing a Todah from Ma'aser Sheni and unconsecrated breads, he should do as such. If he said he's bringing the Todah and the bread from Ma'aser Sheni tithes, he should do so, but the bread should be Ma'aser Sheni tithes from money, not from actual wheat. The Gemara says if a man vows to bring Todah breads, he must bring the Todah and its breads, as presumably he knows the two must be brought together, and he's just speaking here in an abbreviated manner. It tries to dispute this from other discussions, but it's unsuccessful. Related, if somebody vows to bring a Todah without breads, he must then bring a Todah with breads, or at least libations. The reason this vow isn't just annulled by the sages is either we say the first expression that he said in this has primacy, or is that he later says that he thought it was possible to bring a Todah without bread, but now that he knows it's not possible, he says he would have vowed to bring one with bread. It discusses these opinions. We ended by saying that if somebody vows to bring a Todah and its bread from Ma'aser Sheni tithes, it should be brought from Ma'aser Sheni money, or we add with wheat bought with Ma'aser Sheni money. And it quotes sources. There are related principles on purchasing temple offerings with Ma'aser tithe funds, specifically as to whether if Ma'aser Sheni money used to designate a Shlamim offering, as to whether or not this is effective, and it said that it is. New Mishnah. The source for the principle that somebody who vows to bring a Todah offering must bring it from unconsecrated property and not from Ma'aser Sheni tithes is the verse, "You shall slaughter the Pesach to Hashem your God, flocks and cattle," which is odd, as the Paschal offering specifically cannot be brought from cattle. So it's taught that this is to say that any offering that's brought from flocks and cattle is compared to the Paschal offering, that just as it's mandatory and must be brought from unconsecrated property, then all mandatory offerings, such as a Todah offering or a Shlamim offering, must be brought from unconsecrated property also, and this would include libations. The Gemara also sources the principle that the Paschal offering itself must be brought from only unconsecrated property. It discusses several opinions on this in several verses. These are spoken further, and it also brings some additional verses on this topic. And that's the end of chapter 8.